Hello, everybody. Welcome to MHTV. It's lovely to have you with us tonight. It's your usual crew with you, but Dave's back from behind the camera today, so you're going to see a bit more of him. So before we get started, we're going to be talking about gambling and particularly around the kind of mental health issues and how you can support people who are in this situation. Before we do that, because we really do want to hear from you as well, I'll hand over to Dave and he can tell you how you can join in tonight, because we want to hear your questions and anything we need clarifying. So please let us know. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Nicky. Hi, everyone. It's great to be on another episode of MHTV tonight from the other side of the camera. There's a couple of ways that you can join in, as always. The first one is on the Facebook live chat. All you need to do is post your comments or questions, thoughts, anything on there. And obviously, I'll try and bring in as many of those as we can on tonight's episode. The other option you've got is if you're on Twitter, just use the hashtag MHTV. And we'll see those tweets. It's also a really good place for us to share links and information that I'm sure Brigitte will be sharing as we go through tonight's episode. But without further ado, straight back to you, Nicky.
Absolutely. So let's introduce our fantastic guest, Brigitte. Brigitte, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone. Yes, of course, Nicky. So I started, well, my background, first, I'm a psychologist. So I've been working in psychology for about 16 years. Only 7 years ago, I randomly started being pulled into the problem of the gambling. When I moved into the UK, I was only volunteering and finding out about the issue, and it struck me when I started understanding the amplitude of the problem. So I started working a little bit more on that, and very quickly I was working full time about 7 years ago with an organization, a smaller charity, which was more local in London. We did a lot of outreach to trying to raise awareness and also treatment, obviously. And then in 2018, I started my work with GamCare, which is the leading provider of treatment for treatment and support for gambling related harms, so both for gamblers and people affected by someone else's gambling. So I've been with them for 4 years now. I started as a practitioner, so I was mainly treating and supporting people affected. Then I progressed into a team leader position, and now I'm the service manager for the service. It's been very busy. A lot of things have been happening in the charity. We've developed so much, and thankfully more awareness is coming up, and there's a lot being done in the background. Even the NHS is getting involved, so there's a lot happening in the world of the gambling addiction, which is lovely to see.
Absolutely. I guess it would be helpful for us to understand a little bit more about what we mean, what the scope of the issue is, and how gambling can affect people's well-being and the people around them, maybe.
So in terms of scope, there's always been a lot of reticence to talk about numbers, because the number is really not a good representation. So as far as we know, in 2018, there was about 0.4% of the population that was considered as problematic gamblers. However, that's only counting people who actually come forward. And it's really difficult with this specific addiction, which is very hidden, and like most gamblers manage to hide their gambling and the impact of it for years and years and years. If it ever comes out, it's still difficult to gauge whether that would come into be covered by that number. In our point of view, there's a lot more than that, and there's a lot of people who need encouragement to come forward, so we can actually understand the amplitude of the problem in the population. There is one indicator. So in 2018, which is already 4 years ago, so that may have changed, the Gambling Commission survey reported that 7% of the population that was included in the survey reported that they were gambling to earn money to get through their day by day. So it wasn't about fun, which is the reason most people would be gambling, and that would be for fun, to win the jackpot, to think about the dream life. And we all like play the lottery sometimes, or have these random gambling activities that are completely harmless. But 7% of the people in that survey actually said that they were gambling to get money for the day by day, to get day by day for food, for bills, for things like that. So they rely on gambling for this kind of necessities, which is what we see in treatment. This is the kind of stories that we hear. And another 8% of that survey said they were gambling for other reasons than the fun, than the socializing, then, you know, it wasn't positive reason. It's other reasons for them, which we believe could be related to pay debts and things like that. So
so we're seeing people gambling almost out of desperation in some cases, rather than, it's not about enjoyment, it's not about, you know, skill or anything like that. It's genuinely desperate people trying to just get by.
and most of them would gamble
risk,
chase their losses, really.
Yeah.
That's what happens with 99% of the gamblers. They are only trying to recover, and then they obviously lose control, because even if they manage to recover, they are stuck in that loop. And actually every time they win, they reinforce the idea that they can win. So winning is the problem, really. So,
because overall you're losing, otherwise that
exactly. Even
industry.
many of them actually manage to recover at some point because they have a big win, but the problem is that they are too entrenched in the cognitive distortions, and they just carry on with the gambling because they don't realize that the gambling actually has another part in their life. It's not only about the money anymore. It's about the thrill, it's about the escapism, it's about everything in life and what the gambling is providing to them.
I suppose there's a distinct lack of options for some people as well. They really feel they're not choosing from like a wide range of choices. They've got much narrower options and much higher stakes, I guess, in terms of what will happen if they don't have money tomorrow or the next day.
Exactly.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Already we're seeing like a very different picture, I think, than's in a lot of people's mind about what a gambler is. Or so how do we define someone whose gambling has become a problem? How would you assess that?
So in terms of, we talk about the gambling continuum, where on one side of the continuum you have people who are in control. They gamble for fun, occasionally, entertainment, social. They go to the race with their friends, you know, the Grand National, the lottery, things like that. So, and they usually stick to their gambling limits. They have a budget. Okay, I'm only having like 50 quid to spend in the casino because that's a special night, and they allow that budget, and that's fine. They are happy to walk away having lost that money. Then when we increase the risk in the middle of the spectrum is where people start to gamble more frequently on different types of gambling activities, not only their preferred activity, but start looking at other things as well. They start chasing their losses, so they're not accepting that they have lost the money. They also start overspending, go over their limits. They start concealing when they are gambling. They conceal how much they've lost. So the concealment is about the money, but also about the time that they spend. So they would, you know, hide to gamble, for example, and say they've been doing something else instead. They also usually have some kind of you can tell they have difficulties in concentrating in other activities at that point as well. So they become more preoccupied and more isolated as well, because obviously if you spend a lot more time gambling, that's time that you're not spending with your family, and the preoccupation would usually stop them from wanting to engage with other people. Then at the end of the spectrum, where we find the severe gambling and the problematic behaviors, it's when we can start seeing people borrowing money, criminal activity, fraud, stealing, constantly thinking about the gambling. So they become not preoccupied, but obsessed about how they're going to gamble the next time that they're going to gamble. Their relationships are also impacted a lot at that point. Most gamblers will have broken down their relationships, whether it's with friends or at home, with family members, usually because they have either taken money and not being able to pay back, or they pay back and then they ask again. So it's like a vicious circle in terms of finances. Then obviously at work, that also impacts on their ability to focus at work and their productivity, being late at work, or, you know, not being fully in their in what they are supposed to be doing. They could be on their phone instead. So this kind of behaviors at work can be also quite risky, because they may end up losing their jobs as a result. And finally, and which is the one that is most preoccupying for us, is the suicidal thoughts. So when the mental health starts taking the hit of all this, because obviously all this has an impact on the person, and usually they're very stigmatized about the reason why they are in this situation. And judged by most of the population, which is understandable. That's why we're here. We're here to raise the awareness and make people understand that it's not only about a choice, really. But we'll come to this. But yeah, in terms of the gambling continuum, we have people in control, people who are at risk, and people who have a problematic behavior. And the interesting thing is that people can actually jump from one point in the spectrum or the other. So someone, for example, who just lost a lot of money, will decide, okay, that's it, I'm not gambling anymore, or they may not have any more money to gamble for the rest of the month. So they will stop gambling for the rest of the month because they literally cannot. But then when they get their next payday, that's when it falls again, because they are not regularly gambling and not always thinking about the gambling. It's more like a binge of gambling. They will see themselves as not necessarily problematic. So they may not gamble at all for a month or two, but then as soon as it happens again, they lose completely control, and the whole impact happens just the same.
That makes sense. And it's interesting because there's some real overlap between other types of addiction, isn't there? That the shame, the secrecy. Presumably there are a risk of sort of loan sharks and other people who recover money as well.
We do work quite a lot with people affected by loan sharks. That's a huge risk.
I'm being polite when I say recover money there. Yeah.
Obviously that's we usually link up to the police department. They have a special department for loan sharks, and we usually refer to them when this is a situation, and they can actually support people in an anonymized way. It's quite safe, so we do try to encourage people to get engaged with this police service. But yeah, it is very complex. Once they are in that rabbit hole, there's a lot of risk involved, both for the safety of the gambler, but for people around the gambler, the family. So sometimes the loan shark people may actually go to the home and threaten the family members. So it's very concerning when we deal with those ones. In terms of the barriers to speak up and to ask for support, that's really the shame and the guilt are the number one reasons why people, well, along with the awareness. So the fact that they don't know that there is a support available for it, that it's completely confidential, that they can actually have access to counseling, to therapies, to a lot of things, even financial advice. We can help them with lots of things in a confidential way, and lots of them don't know about that service, and they just think that they can't afford to have a therapist or anything like that. So the awareness of the support is really important, and it needs to come from professionals. So as long as professionals involved in the care of people can actually pick up on the issues and say, this person is not well, if you have problems with gambling, just go to this service. It's free, it's confidential, it's safe. But in terms of the other barriers, internal barriers, the shame and the guilt are really, really strong with gamblers, which is natural, because if you think about the other types of addiction, alcohol and drugs, it's almost impossible to hide them. You come to a point where the person will lose consciousness, will be thinking alcohol, and the physical signs of the other addictions in a way are helpful, because it gives people around the person an indicator that something is wrong. With gambling, you don't have that. People can be problematic gamblers for 20 years without any physical signs, although there's a lot of people who eat less, and their physical health is actually impacted. The anxiety,
they're spending money on gambling and then staying hungry.
Yes, exactly. So when they lose all their money, they spend the rest of the month eating very badly or almost not. So we do work a lot with food bank vouchers, and so we do provide parcels through the food bank network. And unfortunately, that's happened more often than it used to. So it is quite worrying to see that people rely on more and more on food bank. And I guess it's not only gamblers, it's everyone with the rising costs of life. And actually what's happening in terms of the cost of living is very worrying for us as well, because a lot of people start thinking about the gambling as a way to meet ends. So we can see an increase of people with suffering from the gambling related harms as a result.
Typically, I mean, with lockdown and things, I guess a lot of gambling moved online rather than in place. So how did that impact the numbers of people maybe and their access? I guess that's very different, isn't it? If you can gamble online 24 hours, it's very different from having to go somewhere to place a bet.
It can be quite difficult for people who are not very familiar with access to IT, Zoom and things like that. But we did, thankfully, GamCare was already quite advanced in the provision of remote support, so telephone sessions, telephone support, and also Zoom. We've been doing Zoom for like 10 years for treatment sessions. So we were sort of prepared, but obviously we saw a huge increase of people transitioning from land-based type of gambling. So, betting shops, casinos, starting to do it online on their phone, which is considerably more risky because it's always there. It's always present. You can gamble at 2 a.m. It's on your phone, just a click away, which wasn't the case with casinos or betting shops. So a lot of vulnerable people actually transition that way.
So I think exactly as you're describing, societally speaking, we've got more instability, higher cost of living, perhaps more desperation. People have been made very uncertain by COVID, very lonely and bored, sometimes at home with nothing but a phone with them. So you've got all the things swirling around together, which look like they're very much going to increase the number of people that come into contact with gambling, come into contact with maybe problem gambling. So suppose you're a health and social care worker or someone who's working, what sort of things should you be looking out for? How might you be able to spot somebody in difficulty, particularly as you say, it's so easy to hide? And there's also, gambling itself isn't as easy to sort of say it's something like a separate behavior, isn't it? Because as you were saying, a lot of people will have a flutter on the Grand National, a lot of people will have lottery tickets. So it's kind of woven into society in a strange way. So how can people identify when someone's in difficulty?
Well, the signs that I mentioned earlier, which actually represented the gambling related harms, as we call them, all the impacts can actually be identified quite easily if you know the person. Obviously, if you don't know the person, but for example, in terms of mental health, if someone starts having mood disorders, having mood swings, which is unusual for that person, didn't used to have those mood swings and all of a sudden become very snappy, and one day is like glowing, super happy, the next day completely down, that's an indicator. And sometimes even in the same day, because they may have lost a lot of money from 1 minute to the next. So they may be starting the day very happy, and then in the next second they may be actually struggling. So there's a lot of shame as well. So is it isolation, people withdrawing from social activities, those people that family members maybe haven't seen for a while. That's weird. We invite the person, they're never available. So someone who shows little availability for social gathering and usually have excuses for not showing up somewhere. It's either because they don't want to face other people, they don't want to be asked any questions, or it's because they sometimes don't even have the money. So obviously, if you don't have, if you're struggling to buy food, you're certainly not going to go to the pub for a brunch or for anything else. So the best way, really, if you suspect that someone is having gambling issues, is not to invite them to go out, but to stay in, for coffee and something like that. So we have lots of symptoms that we can pick up, eating less, so losing weight, self-care, someone who's not taking care of themselves anymore. So for example, if it's a lady, maybe she may not take care of her hair, the makeup, like someone who's taking care of, shows good sign of care. Usually someone who's doing well. So someone who's not doing so well and will be preoccupied, obsessed with something, will let those things slide outside of their routine. Obviously, suicidal ideation is a big sign, and that's also an issue that we recognize, that even sometimes mental health services and professionals working with people who attempted on their own life don't even ask that question. They it's not yet in professionals' mind, and it's not yet an habit. Actually acknowledge that, is this person gambling? Did the suicidal intent came from that? So only now there's a little bit of work done, but it's still very very far from what we need, because a lot, I would say 70 to 80% of the population that we support, so all service users, when they come to us, they will report suicidal ideation at some point. It's huge. It's really, really huge. And the gambling addiction is the addiction that kills the most by suicide. So obviously the other addictions have their own problems in terms of health concerns, but in terms of suicide, that the gambling addiction is the most concerning of all. And so we don't, no one wants to get to that point, obviously, but that's the ultimate sign that something is not right. In terms of other signs, obviously financial struggles, someone with debt, someone who's relying on credit cards, someone who's involved with weird people, loan sharks, someone who's spending family savings, someone who's suddenly involved in criminality, who stole money from someone else. So that's a big sign as well. And someone as well who may be overly spending money. So imagine someone who's struggling with money one day, and the next day will be buying gifts to everyone. So gamblers usually have some level of fear in holding on to the money. So when they actually win, they unconsciously know that this money is going to go, right? So they would usually try and compensate and spend that money quite quickly. So it's very rare when a gambler that wins actually manage to keep the money for a substantial amount of time. They will overspend, usually buy new TV, buy new shoes, buy this, things like that.
It's so interesting because a lot of the things you're saying would flag up, I think, with community mental health workers, people who are working closely with someone from any health. You'd notice things like physical changes, money spending, but you might not necessarily think this is about debt. This is about gambling.
And they're all related.
Yeah, I think Dave has got some questions he's been stockpiling. So do you think, are you ready for us to launch some questions on you? Go on, Dave.
Yep, so we've had Alf. Hi, Alf, great to have you with us again. And he's asking something I wasn't aware of. I don't know if you know about this, Bridget. There seems to be a strand of research suggesting that gay men are particularly at risk of gambling. Would you have anything to add, or are there specific interventions to engage with gay men particularly?
So gaming, it's been a huge part of the conversation because obviously it's not regulated, it's not considered as a type of gambling. However, we do recognize a lot of issues because the way some games are built actually recreate the same neural pathways as gambling neural pathways. So what happens in the brain of a gambler will be replicated in some way in the brain of a gamer, and that depends very much on the types of games as well. So there's a new type of gambling, it's not completely new now. It's called skin gambling, which integrates now internal ways of gambling activities very subtly. So you would loot boxes, buy kind of things inside the game to make your avatar better or to make your guns look better.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So, and then outside of that, there will be platforms where they can actually exchange between gamers, and that here becomes completely bluntly gambling in those platforms.
I think we've had an accent crisis between the North and everywhere else.
And
He's
no,
saying
it's
gay
amazing actually.
men, aren't
Yes,
you?
gay men, homosexual men,
Not gay men.
rather than gaming.
Right, I'm so sorry.
Honestly, I
No,
can
it's-
barely understand him, Bridget. Don't
Okay,
even
well,
worry.
it's also
Just
very
before-
interesting.
Just before you answer though, Bridget, I've got to say that was going to be one of my next questions about how, they develop new ways of parting people from the money that kind of influence that kind of, the gambling side of things. I know people have spoken nationally about concerns of things like in-app purchases and lock boxes, and how, that can be hugely damaging, especially to young people, because, it's kind of targeting young people who you're not allowed to target and aren't allowed to gamble, but actually, do it in a way where you're doing pretty much the same thing to them. But the question that Alf asked was actually about
gay men.
There seems to be a strand of research suggesting that homosexual men are particularly at risk of gambling, which I completely wasn't aware of. And would you have anything to add, or are there specific interventions to engage with homosexual men?
Yes, for me, as a psychologist, it's pretty clear that there is a relationship between minorities and people who have struggled socially, and people who have been also going through a lot of struggles personally, to have this kind of behaviors and turning to addictions in general, not only the gambling, but other types of addiction. It is the gay community is affected not because they are gay, but because what they go through, right? They face a lot of difficulties in society, unfortunately, still. And as a result, they turn very often to escapisms. They do develop mental health issues, depression, identity issues. A lot of things come from childhood as well. A lot of the traumas that we are looking at with gamblers come from their childhood. It doesn't mean that a gay man may be struggling now, but certainly in their childhood, something that may have happened and not have happened to the general population may be a precursor, a risk factor, which will be present with most gay people in general. So that's not surprising, and that happens with other minorities as well, who face a lot of issues, and refugees, for example, people who are more likely to have traumas in their lives and have gone through difficult things. So it's more about mental health than the community itself. But yes, gay community is likely to suffer more. Their mental health is likely to be affected more than the rest of the population.
I'm so impressed that you could answer both of those questions flawlessly. But I think I think it's really interesting as well to consider gambling as a form of response to trauma, because that's not something a lot of people think of.
No, actually, and there are some factors that we can identify as potential risk factors. So people who have been who've suffered traumas in the past, abuse, neglect, bullying, all kind of things that can be traumatic. People who have low self-esteem, who have an existing mental health problem or past mental health problem, even if it's resolved, there's still this history of mental health issues. People who have have or are using drug and alcohol. So co-addiction is very much a big thing, but also people who have stopped using drugs or stopped drinking alcohol, then turn to other type of addiction because they still seek an escapism. And gambling, being a very subtle one, is not something that is on people's radar. They usually think it's harmless, but actually it's just turning from one addiction to the next.
You're right, that idea about self-soothing, distraction, and also playing with power and control, particularly if you feel like you lack it, it makes a lot of sense when you think it through. Are there more questions, Dave?
There is one of the ones that's really interesting is you mentioned about the cost of living crisis. And I suppose, is there any evidence that shows whether gambling increases when there's kind of economic shocks, or is there a decrease? Because you would kind of hope that as people realise they've got less money available to them, that they won't engage in gambling. But I'm guessing that might actually not be true.
So in terms of the impact of what's been happening recently, my first thought would be that we will only see the impact of this on the addiction side of things in not now, because it takes time. We've seen a lot of people coming to our service who have started gambling in the last year. So they are usually young, but really, if we think about the process of the addiction, it's likely that they're actually going to come forward a lot later. So let's say that over the last 6 months, the cost of living has increased quite a lot. People who have started gambling in the last 6 months may only actually start coming for support next year or something like that. It's quite rare that we have someone who starts gambling and a month later has for support. We do have those cases, but that's quite rare. And usually they only come for advice. They're already understanding that, whoa, what am I doing here? That's too much. I've just lost like £600 of my, my salary. That's not okay. So they would kind of have this shock one time and ask for support, but usually it's people try to solve the problem themselves for quite a long time. They will think, well, okay, that was just a mistake, that's fine, I'm just going to stop, and then they do it again and again and again, and only after a few times of doing it they actually understand that they are not able to face the problem on their own.
Okay, and there's a question here about kind of is something like kind of like national lotteries, do they act as a gateway to more serious gambling, or actually are they just something that don't do that if people are going to seriously gamble, then they'll do it whether they've there's no kind of escalation of gambling?
What do you mean? Sorry, can you repeat? I lost you there a little.
I think you're saying is the lottery like a gateway drug to further types of gambling?
So we do have, interestingly, there's seems to be a type of the population that gambles more on scratch cards, lottery. So it is not something that young people would usually choose to gamble. However, we do identify that women, for example, will use bingo, online bingos and things like that, or go to the bingo for socialization and or scratch cards, because they go shopping, they go to the shop. And vulnerable people are usually the ones so people who have mental health issues, people who are dependent, are the ones that usually would kind of get into problems with scratch cards, national lottery. However, the national lottery is something that doesn't come up too often as the main issue. It happens, but it's usually people who are quite vulnerable, which is also very concerning.
Yeah. And there's a question here from someone who's got a family member that has a gambling problem and keeps asking them for money, and that kind of bit about what's the best thing to do. Is it to give them the money because they need it to pay off debts, or is that just kind of feeding the problem and they shouldn't do that?
That's a very good question. So obviously there's the issue of enabling the gambler to carry on gambling. So it really depends on the situation, I'd say, because sometimes how far is the gambler going to go to obtain that money, and how safe is the family member, because in the end that's always about safety, right? So how safe is the gambler, and how safe is the family member? Our preference obviously would be to not enable the gambler, but there are some situations where actually that's the best choice. But there needs to be, if you are providing the money for the gambler to carry on and pay the debt, there may be other ways. Maybe pay the debts for the gambler, maybe pay the bills, paying the bills instead of giving the money, or giving vouchers, giving gift cards that it can be used in shops, things like that. So always avoid giving cash and transfer money, and try to find other routes to support the person without putting the gambler in that position of having money, because very often they are very genuine. They actually want the money to pay the debt or to pay a bill, but as soon as they see themselves with the money available, they lose track. They're triggered. It's a trigger. Having money is a trigger, right? They can have the best intention when they are asking for the money, but as soon as they have it in their pocket, that's when the trigger and the urges come in, because they think, actually, well, I now have £20 that I need to use for my bills or for whatever, and if I could only make it 40, that would be enough to help me enough to pay something else. And usually, obviously, that's when they lose it. So the intention of the gambler may be good. The intention of the person, the family member, is definitely very good, but there needs to be something else put in place. Right? There needs to be a conversation. There needs to be support put in place. There needs to be a listening here. It's all about listening without judging, and understand that there's a lot more going on for that person than just deciding to gamble. So what I would recommend to this family member is to also contact GamCare, because we do provide a very strong support for affected others. And it's all about making sure that the person is okay. The family member cannot do anything and will not be able to support the gambler in a psychological way if they're not okay themselves. And that's why for us it's really important that to safeguard the family members, make sure they are okay, make sure they are not at risk of also having issues with their money, because obviously the family member has a limited resource of money as well. That's impactful. It could sometimes go towards like financial abuse, and this is something that sometimes we actually have to report to authorities. It is not okay to carry on doing this over and over. So it's a case by case, but yeah, I would definitely recommend that person to reach out so that specific case can be discussed and the steps can be made.
I've got a question, if that's okay. It's come through. Forgive me, I'm going to paraphrase your question. I'm going to shorten it a little bit, but it's basically around, I'm not comfortable talking about money. So how do I ask about this? How do I have this conversation? That's a good question.
If I'm not,
someone is talking about this kind of discomfort, the social discomfort. They're not brought up to talk about money. So how do I have this conversation with a service user or somebody I'm looking after? How do you ask about this, is what they've asked.
Oh, we can definitely have a lot of work done without talking about money, because we understand that it's a psychosocial problem. So it's not about the money. What we need to change is everything around the money. Sometimes we even have very successful treatment without touching on the budget or talking about the money. It's about understanding what's going on around that, but also changing the relationship with the money, because sometimes the relationship the person has with the money is also problematic, and making the person more comfortable about talking about money can actually be key. So changing the way we interact with money and changing the way we perceive money is quite important.
So what does recovery look like then? Because you're saying someone can go a long time if they don't have any cash without gambling, but the problem is still there underlying the minute the money comes back, the minute the impulse comes back. So how can you tell if someone's better?
So obviously there's the aftercare is something that goes on, right? So the recovery doesn't stop when they stop their sessions. It carries on for them. They need to have their plan in place in the future. So obviously having some blockings, obstacles to gamble. If the person gambles online, having, blocking softwares in place, having some kind of blocking on their bank accounts to make sure that they are not able to use their credit cards and debit card for gambling activities online. If it's in the betting shops, then making sure that they are self-excluded. So those steps are helpful for the future because they represent an obstacle. They are not the answer, because if a gambler really wants to gamble, they will find a way. However, it will provide them with some time to reflect on what they're doing, and it might actually stop them one day, and they may try or not the next day. But in terms of the long-term recovery, we do see some people come back. It's quite common that people will relapse, and it's part of the process as well. And one thing that we really work on is the acceptance that this may happen, and that's not the end of the world. It's about containing the impact of it and learning from it. If a relapse happens, it's because something happened. Something else happened that triggered it. And it's about a lot of psychological work to identify what are those triggers, what is triggering you to relapse, and working together in finding ways to respond to those triggers. If it's stress, then finding ways to reduce the stress. If it's debt, having ways to reduce the debt or to reduce the pressure that the debt is putting on, so feeling more on control.
But that way of working will be quite familiar to people in health and social care, isn't it? Find out what the behaviour is trying to communicate.
Yes.
Find what the underlying issue is, then find out what the most pressing issue is, and almost reverse engineering your solution.
Exactly. And one of the big things that makes a huge difference is the changes that happen during the treatment. So the changes that happen during treatment are not only about the money, they are not about stopping the behavior. It's the changes that are implemented around the person. So having better relationships, having a better way of communicating with people when they're struggling, having a support network in place that they're actually using effectively, having tools to budget their money, having lots of other resources that they didn't have before, and the acknowledgement that something needs support. They need support with some things. That makes a huge difference, and usually they are a lot more comfortable going away after the treatment and putting things in place. It's about self-awareness. A lot. So the person in treatment will discover a lot of things about themselves. They will find out about their own personal traumas, maybe personal issues, what they need to work on, and their goals. What do they want to achieve in life? What are the things that they are not so happy about that they could actually change, and the things that they cannot change as well, and then accept those things.
We've been talking a little about triggers, and I've got a question that might trigger you. So let me ask it. If it's like, I can't deal with this right now, we'll stop. So I want to ask them, shouldn't the government be doing something about this? I think the government have got issues at the moment, but yes. So I mean, like, if they, the question is about they legislate against drugs and alcohol, or around drugs, shouldn't they be doing something about gambling then?
So there is a better regulation than it used to be. If you think about 20 years ago, right, it was quite ignored. So some things are happening, but unfortunately it happens very slowly. And at the moment, it's still not considered a public health issue like the other addictions are. So until it gets actually to that point, the government doesn't really get involved, because it's not under the right place, right?
Is there a gambling industry lobbying then about this? What's the industry's response?
So I don't really work directly with the industry, thankfully, but obviously that's something that may be happening. There's a lot of things happening in the government, and the industry is quite strong as well. But they are also doing a lot of things to improve the service user experience and making things safer. So GamCare is also working with the industry to train their staff and to put things in place, come up with new ideas in identifying people who are gambling too much, people who are being affected, having pathways in place to make sure they have someone to talk to if they are gambling too much. So there's a lot of work being done between the industry and services like ours to make sure that they actually have things in place.
Yeah.
However, a business is a business, right? So
Complicated path to tread, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
On one hand, you've got the fact someone can die because of this, and the other hand, you've got the fact that some people manage.
Yeah, and the industry recognizes that this is not something that is good for them either.
No,
right? They prefer someone who gambles for the rest of their life reasonably than gambling for a year, all their money, and then never gamble again because they stopped completely. So there's no benefit for the industry to have gamblers who
are desperate,
problematic gamblers, and that's also very bad publicity for them. So it's a huge conversation that's happening, obviously, for many years. But there is something happening with the government. Unfortunately, I can't really know what's happening. We are hoping that things will happen, and the NHS is also pushing a lot for this. So we actually have a partnership with NHS services, a surgery in South London. So they are training their GPs to identify the issues. But it's a pilot, so it's working very well at this moment. We work in collaboration with them. So there's stuff happening, and as soon as this pilot shows that there is actually this is working, this is needed, then hopefully that will be rolled out to the whole country, and the NHS will actually consider push for a public health agenda on the gambling issues.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I know that's partly getting people to understand that this is a public health issue, because a lot of the skills that we have in other areas are transferable and they can be used to support this population for sure. What other resources are there? Because I can see we're coming towards the end of our time now. So what other resources could maybe people listening read or have a look at so that they can be better prepared?
So if you go into the website, the GamCare website, there are referrals. So there's a route pathways to refer. A gambler will need to refer themselves. If you are a professional, you can refer someone who you were supporting. Unfortunately, we do not take referrals from third parties. However, if you're a family member, we can also support you. If you're affected by someone else's gambling, we can help you. We can give you all the advice that you need. We can help you understand how the addiction works, and we can also help you coping better with it, find ways to deal with difficult situations. So there's a lot of self-help tools for gamblers on the website, resources available for gamblers. But ultimately, there's also the referral pathway, which will put the person in touch with the treatment team. There's also an online CBT course, so cognitive behavioral therapy. It's all online. So there's 8 modules that the gambler can actually complete, and they will have someone, a professional, a practitioner, calling them at the end of each module they complete to review how they felt, what was difficult, what were the benefits of it. So there's a little bit of interaction with a professional. Essentially, it's all done online. So for someone who is not ready to approach a professional and be in sessions with someone else, that's a good option.
That's a brilliant resource.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a really good thing.
And
people can do their own learning at their own speed. They've got control, something maybe they don't have in other areas of their life, but also
they can also choose to step up and go into treatment as soon as they feel that they are ready to talk to someone. We have forums where online chats where gamblers will find about other people's situation, hear about similar situations in them. So having the peer support and lived experience to share is really important. And we also have a lived experience service that makes sure that we integrate or service user's voice into what we do. So we listen to what helps, what do they think is helpful for them, what helped them when they went through that problem, and integrate this in the way we support people. We also have a partnership with Peer-Aid, which is a lived experience mentoring service. So when we have someone in treatment, we can also put them in touch with a mentor who has been through the same. So it's usually very helpful. They have groups, well-being groups. So we have a bunch of things that are very helpful. It's all on the website. Lot of information there. I can't go through all of it. The self-help tools are really helpful. There's a booklet for gamblers to go through. There's a diary, a gambling diary. There's strategies for them to use in terms of cognition and thinking about what their triggers and their urges. So it's all very useful.
Yeah, some really great practice. So just before we come to an end, let's just check with Dave. Is there anything that you wanted to ask or add, Dave?
Nothing to ask, but just to add that, I think it's when I heard Brigitte speak at the Nursing in Practice conference that we supported with Kagora. What's always great is a session where you feel by the end of it, any health professional that's listened has a toolkit of things that they can do. And I think, again, Brigitte's given some really good ideas, some really good resources in terms of how people can support people with gambling addictions. So it's really great to hear that, isn't it, Nicky?
Yeah,
absolutely. Is there anything that you can leave the audience with, Brigitte?
Yes, of course. So, well, one thing that I would like to say is that we see huge changes in people's life very quickly. That's something that unfortunately doesn't happen so quickly with other addictions, but with gamblers specifically, it's possible to see a U-turn in their life quite significantly and quite quickly, which is the good news. It's obviously the gambling debts might stay, but in terms of psychological and relationships and all that, it's possible to see lots of change very quickly, which is very, very good. And we do have around a 77% successful rate in treatments.
Good.
So, it's just about getting people to get support, really, because the support works, the treatment works quite well. It's just having them to know about us and to contact us and not try to hide it any longer and try to tackle this on their own. And what makes the biggest difference for gamblers is when they have the support of their loved ones, when they are able to talk. As soon as they open up to their loved ones, it changes completely the whole picture. It's usually the moment when they start talking to someone about what's going on that everything changes. So it happens a lot with us. They talk to us for the first time. They never spoke to anyone else about what's going on. They've been in that issue for 10 years, holding that burden on their own, and suddenly they decide to talk to someone, and just verbalizing it makes all the difference. And they hear themselves say these things, and it makes a shift mentally, which is also very important when we try to lead them to a point where they do this with their family and loved ones. That's huge, really, and that's beautiful to see.
It is. It's an amazing success rate, and coming from connection as well, which is human stuff, isn't it? So thank you very, very much for that. And we've been tweeting out links and things so if this is a subject that's touched you or that you want to learn more about, please just check on the Twitter feed and you'll be able to access that information, or just Google it. And thank you all very much for your time today. We've really enjoyed spending time with you and talking to you. And if you've joined in with questions, again, thank you very much. So it remains for us just to say bye then for the moment, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
Brilliant. And Brigitte, if you just turn your monitor, your picture and microphone off again, just while we do the closing video.